Some words have been changed to abide by YouTube censorship. Candy Spelling released her memoir in 2014 and dedicated the book to her deceased husband, Hollywood producer and writer Aaron Spelling. She said in her preface, "Protecting Aaron from scrutiny and preserving his reputation became my number one priority." One has to wonder what exactly she has been covering up about Aaron and herself over the years. She said as she has aged, she has lost the need for filters and has spoken openly about her life experiences. She said she has resolved issues with her children, her daughter in particular, with the help of therapy. In dealing with such enormous problems, there's an old adage that questions, how do you deal with an elephant in the room? For her, the answer she found was with one bite at a time. Kenny's book would be compared to Tori's book, Storytelling in Mommywood. Kenny doesn't tell her life story in a linear fashion. She bounces back and forth in time and chapters as the memories come up for her. But it's easier to understand her life, to take her book apart and follow a timeline from beginning to end. She began her life story with her grandparents in chapter 13. Her maternal grandmother, Helen, was Hungarian, and she married a Hungarian immigrant, Eugene Rawson, in the U.S. Her grandfather Eugene owned all the meat concessions in Grand Central Market and provided a comfortable lifestyle for his wife and two children, Kenny's mother and her uncle Milton. They eventually moved to Beverly Hills, where Eugene became president of Sinai Temple. Kenny's mother could remember a far less developed Sunset Boulevard when people rode horses and buggies. She said her uncle Milton ended up stealing the meat concession business from her father and changed his last name to separate himself from the family. Her grandparents fell on hard financial times, and when Kenny's mother became engaged to Kenny's father, her grandmother Helen had to scrub floors to earn enough money to afford a trousseau for her. A trousseau usually included a wardrobe to see the bride through the early hard years of a marriage. A hope chest filled with household wares, including real silverware, linens, and possible kitchen items like pots and pans, anything a young couple needed to get their life started. It may also include a dowry for the expenses a husband takes on with a wife. The dowry is meant for the wife's care and is overseen by the husband, but if the couple was to divorce, the dowry is meant to be relinquished to the wife so she can continue to see to her care. Kenny's father was Merit Maurer, and his parents were Arthur and Ada Maurer. They were Russian immigrants originally from Chicago. She said her grandfather Arthur had a heart attack and died in the arms of another woman, possibly when he was frequenting the Copacabana in New York City. Kenny's parents were already married when Arthur passed away, and her maternal grandmother felt so sorry for what happened to her paternal grandmother, she welcomed the widow into her life. Kenny's paternal grandmother became involved with her maternal grandfather, and her maternal grandfather left her maternal grandmother for her paternal grandmother. Got it? It caused a major family crisis, and although Kenny was never directly told about it, she overheard enough as a child to understand what happened. On top of that, they would have these family get-togethers where Candy said no one even acknowledged how horrible the situation was for everyone involved. She said everyone ignored the giant elephant in the room. Candy said this was a pattern in her family. The men committed these transgressions, and the women in the family bore the burden. They had no choice. They had no way of taking care of themselves, and if they left their husbands, they would have to take menial jobs like scrubbing floors in order to survive. So they just ignored what their husbands did to them. There was no choice. Candy's parents met and built their lives in Beverly Hills, where after World War II, the residential city was being sold as a glamorous shopping and lifestyle destination. She said her parents were middle class, with their father working as a traveling salesman for a furniture line, a grifter. Kenny said her mother worked for a time as a fit model for dress companies. They lived well beyond their means, with a housekeeper and a houseman who drove both Candy and her brother Tony to school. She was embarrassed to be taken to school by a driver because other children didn't have that. They just walked to school. Candy's mother was also a perfectionist who dressed her in fancier clothes compared to other children, and they bullied her in kindergarten. Her teacher held her back because she believed Candy was not emotionally mature enough for first grade. Candy said her mother thought she was not very smart, and Candy knew what her mother thought of her. She said when she didn't live up to her mother's expectations, not only did she feel like she failed, but her mother believed Candy's failures were also her own failures. Her father lost his business, and the family lost their home and had to move into a Hollywood apartment. Candy said despite their circumstances, her mother brought her up properly. She was taught how to cook, how to set a French table service, how to needlepoint, how to entertain, and how to curtsy at the private school she attended. Eventually, the Mara family recovered enough to return to Beverly Hills address, and Candy met her first husband, Howard, when she was still a student at Beverly Hills High School. Her mother approved of not only Howard, but the wealthy family he came from. The engagement ring Howard gave Candy was a disappointment, but the young couple had their parents' blessing for a marriage. Since there was no family money on Candy's part to pay for a wedding, Howard's mother suggested they elope to Las Vegas. Candy had to take her parents with her because she was only 17 and her groom was 21. They honeymooned on a cruise to Hawaii, but Candy said she returned still a virgin. Apparently, Candy was unable or unwilling to be intimate with her husband. She went to a doctor who examined her and told her the problem was she was very young and stressed out about her first time. Although the relationship was eventually consummated, they would continue to have intimacy issues, and Candy counted 8 times in the marriage when they were actually intimate. It may have been problems outside the bedroom that was causing the relationship issues. Howard relied on the largesse of his family to support them and had no work ethic himself. He spent his time in a casino playing poker. Candy fell under the control of Howard's father, who made all the financial decisions for them, and Candy said she felt like her father-in-law was more like her husband, whatever that included. The couple had no say in their own lives, and Candy was so unhappy in her marriage that her father in particular wanted to know if she was okay. Apparently, Candy wanted a home rather than renting an apartment, and her father-in-law expected them to move into a 5-bedroom home where he expected the couple to fill the bedroom with the grandchildren he wanted. Finally, after a night of arguing, Howard walked out on her and called her parents. Candy's mother took control of the situation and not only rescued her daughter, but all the furniture they had in their apartment. Candy divorced Howard and had her name legally changed back to Mara. She did not mention what kind of divorce settlement she received, but Candy was very much like her mother, and both women were mercenary. Candy said she was never like her generation of young women, and she loved classic jazz and music from the 1940s. She didn't care for the Beatles in 1964 like other 19-year-old women her age. She said she was an old soul in a young body, but there was no generation gap between Candy and her parents, and she simply liked what they liked. She said as a child she was taught children were seen and not heard, and she wasn't allowed to develop her own interests. She moved back in with her parents and eventually was offered a job in retail by Jack Hansen. Nancy Sinatra Jr. told Candy the 3 most important men in America at that time were her father, Frank, Hugh Hefner, and Jack Hansen. He owned stores in major cities in the U.S. with a flagship store in Beverly Hills. Candy told him she could only work 4 hours a day, and he gave her a job paid on commission. She said all the other young women she worked with were lazy, and she made more in 4 hours than the others made in 8. Mostly the job just gave her something to do as she put herself back out in the market, hoping to catch a wealthy husband. Jack also owned a private nightclub called the Daisy where celebrities hung out. On any given night, people like Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, Catherine Ross, and Peter Sellers were seen there. Since Candy worked for Jack, she was given access to the nightclub. A friend of hers set her up on a blind date one night, and they made their way to the Daisy. Aaron Spelling was there with a date, and Candy already knew who he was. These young women knew all the wealthy, eligible men in the city and were seeking to land one for a husband. Aaron was 23 years older than Candy and was not only known as a playboy, but for having a casting couch in his office, meaning starlets who worked for him had to sleep with him in order to get a job. Very nasty thing to do. Still, when Aaron asked Candy to dance with him, she agreed and claimed there was a profound connection between them. Okay? Not everyone is attracted to looks. Pretty doesn't matter to women like Candy. She said cynics would say it was lust. On her part, certainly on his. There's no two ways about it. Candy looked like a life-size Barbie doll. She was thin and pretty and young with blonde hair and blue eyes. As always with women like her, she looked like a young woman from the 50s rather than the 60s. And Aaron had yet to be with her. Aaron said, "I'm going to marry you someday," and Candy said she thought it was a line he said to other women. And it probably was. It's what these women wanted, and he knew it. She called him that night, and she said they talked for hours. Still, she was worried about becoming his flavor of the week. She agreed to be his hostess at a barbecue at his home he had on Sunday evenings, and he gave her a little gold pin with rubies, diamonds, and emeralds. Candy's mother did not approve of the relationship. He was too old for her, he wasn't attractive, and he played around too much. She told Candy he probably had a drawer of pins he gave out to young women. And what was most important was she wasn't sure how much money he had. He was in the process of leaving his writing position for TV to start his own business. Candy's mother wanted her to be with a handsome Del Coleman who owned his own vending machine company. It doesn't sound like much now, but vending machines were big business at one time. Candy's mother wasn't so sure about Aaron's spelling. He had grown up poor in Dallas, Texas, where he was bullied for being Jewish. He psychosomatically lost the use of his legs due to the anti-Semitism and learned during that time he had a real writing ability and knew how to imagine worlds outside of his own. He later recovered when he served as a pilot in the Army during World War II, and he graduated from Southern Methodist University in 1949. Candy said in Chapter 4, Aaron was 30 years old when he moved to Los Angeles without a car or a typewriter. She claimed he had ideas and worked hard and pulled himself out of poverty with his own bootstraps. He met an actress 7 years younger than he, named Carolyn Jones, who would eventually be known to us by playing Morticia in the Addams Family early TV show. Kenny said she was an alcoholic and even threatened to unalive herself in the bathroom before Aaron finally left her. They were together for 11 years. Aaron came up with a pilot for the Mod Squad from meeting a retired police officer at the Daisy. Kenny said Aaron produced work that tapped into the nervous system of America, and Aaron did produce many shows including Charlie's Angels, Fantasy Island, Melrose Place, Beverly Hills 90210, Seventh Heaven, Dynasty, and Charmed. His work didn't have the substance or depth of producer Norman Lear. Aaron also produced many TV movies. It was a time when there weren't many channels on TV, and in truth, much of what went on these stations was not considered very good. Regardless, Aaron was able to cash in financially on his work, and no doubt Candy knew it. She had a hard time landing him. She said they had 2 breakups and a marriage proposal in between. They even went to City Hall to get a marriage license, but Aaron let it expire. Candy said she thought he was trying to protect his ex-wife's feelings, which only hurt her even more. Candy's father was tired of waiting up for her when she went out on dates and returned so late, so he told her she needed her own apartment. She said she was surprised because nice Jewish girls didn't live on their own. Candy decided she was going to move to New York and work as a model. Her mother accused her of leaving to make Aaron want her even more. It was probably true. Candy was playing hard to get. She found an apartment for Candy at the Barbizon Hotel, a strictly women-only building with even more strict conduct codes. The room was bare, with a single bed and a desk, but Candy thought once her modeling career took off, she would rent a better apartment. She continued to talk to Aaron every day, and he convinced her to spend a romantic weekend with him at a hotel. Aaron had a fear of flying after a plane he was meant to be on crashed, so Candy was the one who flew to see him. The problem was she had a blind date her mother set her up with at the same time, and although she left a message with the stockbroker's secretary, somehow he didn't get it and contacted Candy's mother, wanting to know where Candy was. Her mother had an idea and called Aaron's secretary, who had to call Aaron and Candy at their hotel room. Candy flew back to New York and tried to convince her mother some story she concocted, but her mother hung up on her twice. Candy's mother would die at a young age after she was diagnosed with leukemia. She was only 55. Candy said she had a list of ailments, and some of her conditions were psychosomatic. She said the bitterness of her life ate her up inside. She spent her life trying to be happy on the outside, but nothing was ever enough to fill that gaping hole. Candy said the hole expanded and filled itself with resentment. It's hard to tell whether Candy is talking about her mom or herself. Aaron called Candy when he was sick and felt lonely because he didn't have anyone to take care of him. Candy just signed a lease on an apartment and didn't believe him when he said he would get married if she returned. Aaron called her parents for their blessing, and Candy flew home to California. In Chapter 5, she said they were married on November 23, 1968. It was Thanksgiving, and Aaron gave her a diamond pin from Van Cleef & Arpels. He would later buy Candy far more expensive jewelry. Candy was presented with a premarital agreement before the ceremony, and she was highly insulted Aaron would expect her to sign it. She said he tore it up right in front of her. Candy claimed she bought more into the marriage than Aaron, but that's a complete lie. He had money, or she wouldn't have married him. And there's no way she ever made that much money as a model. She doesn't want to admit she married for money, labeling her a gold digger and status chaser, but that's who she was, and women were encouraged to do that. Some women still do. And although she said in Chapter 19 they built everything together, that's not true. Aaron was successful before she came along. He just became more successful after her. Candy claimed she was some sort of financial wizard, and she invested and managed Aaron's money. That's ridiculous. This woman has no education beyond a high school diploma. Aaron had money managers before Candy came along, and people with financial backgrounds took care of the money. Candy just spent it. What's odd is the fact Aaron was such a playboy for years, with a casting couch at work. And yet after marrying Candy, he somehow manages to settle down and automatically puts his wandering eye in the past. Very odd indeed. As Tori pointed out in her book, her mother had a lot of headaches. Candy said headaches run in her family. One has to wonder if unhappiness does too. Candy said she stayed up late after Aaron went to bed at night so she could cook or buy her collectibles online or something. Anything but go to bed. Right from the start, Candy found the role of Mrs. Aaron Spelling to be luxurious but intimidating. She felt she lost her identity and became the wife of a very important man. She had to socialize with the other wives of Aaron's inner circle of men, and they were 20 years older than she was. She had nothing in common with them, and no doubt they were hoping their husbands didn't get the idea of trading them in for a younger model. They ran some kind of charity event or another to keep themselves occupied, and it gave them something to do. But the money these women spent on themselves was far more than they ever gave back to society. Mostly they met for lunches and drank themselves into oblivion. Aaron gave her credit cards to go shopping, but they were in his name, and she didn't have a credit card of her own until much later. Not Mrs. Aaron Spelling, but just Candy Spelling. She said it felt like she was equal in some way, like she had to be given the right to vote. There were lyrics to a song called The House That Built Me, Candy included in her book, about a woman who returns to visit her childhood home because she has lost who she once was and she hopes by somehow returning to where she came from, she will remember the person she still is somewhere inside of her. Candy found the lyrics touched her in some way. Aaron was a very traditional man who expected Candy to be there for him when he needed her. For that she was rewarded financially with anything she wanted. The longer she was married, the more Candy wanted. She was pulled into a celebrity world where she would socialize with the rich and famous. Aaron knew many stars like Joan Crawford, who invited her male guests into her bedroom to watch her undress. Candy said she didn't mind when Joan did it with Aaron. Through him, she met Natalie Wood, Robert Wagner, Dean Martin, Janet Leigh, Betty Davis, Michael Jackson, Lou and Edie Wasserman, and her frenemy, Elizabeth Taylor. Candy said in Chapter 8, referring to how Elizabeth treated her, "There I was on Aaron's arm, and she acted like I was invisible. She was very touchy-feely with my husband, and as cool as a cucumber with me." Both women were at the same party where they were wearing emerald suites. Aaron bought Candy her jewels from Van Cleef and Arpels, while Elizabeth outshined her in a Bulgari set. Candy said she didn't admit it to Aaron, who undoubtedly knew nothing about jewelry and didn't care one way or the other. But Candy's jewelry gifts would grow in an attempt to challenge Elizabeth Taylor's jewels. Candy came pretty close. Her collection was in the millions, with Tori commenting in her book, Storytelling, that Aaron eventually bought Candy a 44-carat diamond. Not a 4.4 carat, but a 44-carat diamond. In Chapter 12, Candy said as soon as people found out they were married, they immediately asked her, "When are you having a baby?" At first, Candy said she didn't have baby fever and was willing to let Mother Nature do her part. But years passed and she became more frustrated and depressed about it. She talked to Aaron about adopting, and although he wasn't very keen on adopting, Aaron seemed to always acquiesce to his wife, and they signed up at an adoption agency. As he moved to the top of the adoption list, Candy found out she was pregnant. She said they were very excited. She said there was no fertility specialist then, and she seemed to think the problem was her fault. She said she really wanted to be a mother, and it wasn't just about women of her generation breeding without a second thought. As for Aaron, he was career-driven, and having children did not make his priority list. They put a lot of thought into the name they gave their baby girl, who was born on May 16, 1973. Candy went to school in Beverly Hills and recalled hideous names some of the girls were given, like Pepper Salters and Ginger Snaps. She said she felt sorry for the girls and knew they didn't like their names either. They decided on Victoria Davy Spelling. Candy said she didn't like the nickname Vicky, and with the help of Barbara Stanwyck, she chose the nickname Tori from the very beginning and called her that from day one. She said it suited Tori, and she should thank these women for coming up with a name that would be so pivotal for Tori's future branding. It would be over 5 years later before Randall Gene Spelling was born on October 9, 1978. He was born premature like Tori and had to spend over 2 months in the hospital before they could take him home. Candy said the day she gave birth to Tori, she promised to be a perfect mother. She said, "I think especially because I had such an unhappy childhood. I wanted my children to have perfect childhoods." She imagined all mothers make that promise. They wanted to throw out what was bad and not repeat the damage done to them, but how much Candy was able to do that is questionable. Aaron's mother, Pearl, raised her children in poverty and went to bed hungry so her children could have enough to eat. So Aaron wanted to give as much as he could to his own children. Candy wanted a childhood for her children where they were allowed to be children and not pupils in finishing school. She wasn't allowed to have pets as a child, and she thought her children would have a pet or two, but amongst Aaron and Tori and Randy, they ended up with a mini zoo. She said Tori thrived on being Aaron Spelling's daughter and did well in school. She eventually went to University of Southern California on her own merit and was serious about becoming an actress. Randy was a sensitive and emotional child who didn't like competitive environments. Sounds like he was very artistic. She had to search for a school that was more nurturing and not as academic. She said she regretted her children did not find her affectionate enough. Candy said she was coming from a family where there was no affection, and to her the care she gave her children was more than certainly what she had been given. However, it's obvious Candy is completely detached from the feelings of her children. In her book, she included a photo of her two children dressed up for Halloween. She said it was her favorite photo of the children. These are obviously costumes the children didn't choose for themselves, and no doubt Candy spent a fortune having them custom made. Tori wrote about that night in her book. It was a nightmare for them. Other children made fun of them and threw eggs at them. And Candy knew what the children went through on that night because she knew all about the book Tori put out years before Candy wrote her book. And still she picked that photo as her favorite. There's something really missing with Candy. Often Erin was the good cop with the children and she became the bad cop out of necessity. And if she could do it over again, she wouldn't have allowed him to place her in that role. Erin could be a very manipulative person and could find a way of making himself appear to be the good guy in any situation. He often played people like Candy and Tori against each other for his benefit. Of course, the children didn't hold Erin as responsible because he was more like their grandfather than a father to them. She also said she wished her children had been told to earn the gifts they were given and to do more for themselves. She said she thought people should earn their own way in life. This coming from a woman who married her money. Kenny would go on in chapter 15 to blame Erin for the monstrosity of a house they would build as a testament to the Texas rugged individualist who wanted big houses. The manner, as Tori would label it, was Candy spending all the way. It was all her, and Erin worked to pay for it. Whatever she wanted, he got her. Whatever she wanted, he did. They moved from the 2,500 square foot home to a 6,500 square foot home and onto a 12,000 square foot home in Holmby Hills. They also bought a beachside home in Malibu, and Erin wanted a Texas ranch where they could have farm animals and lots of open land. Candy thought it was too much. She said Erin worked all the time and it was left to her to dictate all the responsibilities of running the homes. Tori said in her book, Mommywood, that Candy would check the jobs of the housekeepers by running her two fingers along the countertops with her massive ring on. It's no surprise she had trouble keeping help. For some reason, she had to have butlers who worked at Buckingham Palace, and as soon as they got their green card, they left her for better employers like David Geffen. One butler left in the middle of the night so he wouldn't have to face her. She said she called a family meeting and proposed selling their home in the city to find a new house that would combine the city living they could enjoy along with the country living they also wanted. Candy said Erin and the kids were skeptical, which is understandable. But Candy got what she wanted. Then she retired to her bathroom for a relaxing bath. She said it was the only room she had privacy. Candy contacted a realtor looking for the house she wanted. She said there are rustic areas of Los Angeles that can be had for a price, no doubt. And her definition of rustic is different than most other people's definition. The family certainly would not get the land they wanted for the horses and other farm animals. The house Candy eventually had built took up half the land. The place she decided on was called the Bing Crosby Old Estate. It was 15,000 square foot mega mansion with 5 acres, and the Spellings paid $10,250,000 for the place. They started construction to tear down the mansion with so much Hollywood history to build a monster mansion, the largest residence in Los Angeles. The neighbors were very upset to see the home destroyed, not to mention the years of living near a construction site. The French chateau-inspired 56,500 square foot mansion with 17,000 square feet of attic storage space was called Look at Me, I'm Rich architecture. One article asked, is bigger really better? in the land of conspicuous consumption and said the mansion looked like a mental institution. Candy said the house grew beyond the original scope, but there was a whole wing in the original blueprints someone decided was not necessary to build. Thankfully. As it is, there's 123 rooms. They didn't move into the house until Valentine's Day 1991. Tori and Randy were too grown to use some of the playrooms Candy had originally designed for them years earlier. The Los Angeles Times called it a monster mansion built from distorted values at a time when so many people are homeless. The conspicuous consumption comment came from the Golden Age when a select few maniacally rich families were building monstrosities to live in at a time when they had to pay very little in taxes. There were many poor people with a few ultra-rich who controlled far too much in this country, and what little they gave to charity was nothing compared to the mega money they spent on themselves, including owning multiple mansions around the world. This conspicuous consumption returned in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan, and many people suffered for the greed of a select few. And it's returned again under the conservative leadership of Donald Trump. Candy said Aaron earned all of his money, but there are plenty of people who would disagree with her. It seems with many Hollywood productions there are all these producers, usually half a dozen or more, who don't write or even show up on the set, but are networking themselves into these shows and big budget movies to pull 7-digit paychecks at least. In Aaron's case, he had to make 8 digits. Aaron did act and write early on, but once he found himself in the producer's chair, it was smooth sailing all the way. And what's sad is so many other people who actually work on these productions are underpaid and can hardly pay their bills, while the few connected people on top sit at their desks and smoke their cigars or pipes and consume most of the money brought in. And from Aaron, it flowed right into Candy's hands. Once Candy had her mansion built, she had to fill it up with what she called her collectibles, and had huge parties for all the famous people she knew. She said the most important element of a successful party is creating a welcoming atmosphere where everybody feels comfortable. It's impossible to believe anyone would feel comfortable in a mansion that has the warmth of a museum. Certainly there were times when Aaron did not look happy in the photos. He wanted to work and come home to a peaceful home where he could sit at the table with his children and eat and enjoy spending time with them. Instead, this is what his life had become. Candy created the monster mansion, and Aaron created the monster in Candy. She had a huge humidity-controlled wine cellar filled with no doubt vintage wines. She had rows and rows of humidity-controlled glass-covered shelves to store all her collectibles. One collection is her Madame Alexander dolls. They are extremely expensive, and Candy claims she bought a set of them for Tori growing up. The dolls were behind a row of glass-covered shelves in Tori's room, and you can imagine little Tori was frightened by all those creepy dolls staring down at her at night. Candy eventually auctioned them off, and as with all sets of collections, a few dolls went for astronomical prices, while the rest didn't sell for as much. She later sued the auction company for $500,000 after she said they didn't return the unsold dolls after she terminated her contract with them. It certainly wasn't worth the price she paid for them, plus their upkeep for decades, and insuring them, plus taxes and upkeep on the monster mansion to house them. She would have been better off with stocks and bonds, but that wouldn't satisfy Candy's shopping addiction. And don't forget all the storage space for her lower-end purchases. Candy, like many people, fell for the Beanie Baby grab and hooked her daughter Tori into it too. Tori said it wasn't about bonding between mother and daughter, but a competition. People just lost their minds over these little $5 beanie bag toys. Like anything that's cheaply mass-produced by the millions by 10-year-old children in China is ever going to be worth anything, but people believed it. Tori said in her book, Mommywood, that Candy called her about one of the Beanie Babies up for sale online, and she paid $2,500 for one baby that originally cost $5. There's a creator on YouTube who talked about this, and here's a very sad story about one family who was financially damaged by the Beanie Baby craze. Candy is obsessed with collecting anything, but she tries to cover up her greed by pointing to some charity work she was involved with, like Centro de Niños, a nonprofit bilingual and bicultural daycare center that serves the working poor in East Los Angeles. 150 to 200 children are invited to the manor for an Easter party. 150 to 200 children are invited to the manor for an Easter party. Candy said she brought the children in to see her vast collection of Madame Alexander dolls, and she said they really enjoyed it. Sure they did. They just loved to stare at a bunch of creepy dolls that collectively cost more than a house in LA. They just loved it. Who does this woman think she is kidding? What little she gave for the party was nothing compared to even one piece of jewelry Aaron bought her. She is not a philanthropist. There's no such thing as a rich philanthropist. It's an oxymoron, and she only doled out minute amounts of money to people in need just for the publicity. That includes a fundraiser for the Prince Charles Charitable Foundation. Candy invited 300 of who's who of Hollywood and charged $10,000 a plate. $3 million was raised that night, minus the carpet the prince had to pay for to cover up the silk carpet in the Spelling mansion 300 people would have to walk on to go to the catered event located outside. Candy said Aaron looked exhausted by the time the dessert was served. As the prince and his entourage left, Aaron turned to Candy and said he never thought the prince would ever leave. He didn't care about those status society events. It was all for Candy, the perfectionist. Aaron was growing older and his health was declining. In the early 1990s, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. After decades of smoking a pipe, he had throat cancer. Candy said not once did they ever talk about his health. She said both she and Aaron came from backgrounds and generations where people just didn't discuss problems, so they didn't. Later, Candy noticed Aaron's memory was slipping, and she had a doctor examine him for Alzheimer's. Aaron was angry about the doctor visit, but it was obvious without the full battery of tests that his mind was slipping away. As Aaron stayed at home, Candy went out without him, and the age gap between them meant they were not growing old together at the same speed. They were growing further and further apart. Candy was seeing a therapist, and she started seeing one before Aaron's many diagnoses. Her first therapist told her she had anger issues and referred her to someone more suitable for her problems. Candy needed long sessions before she could open up, and she started seeing her therapist 3 times a week. She said her therapist couldn't shut her up, which is good. That's what therapy is for. Candy learned she was a poor communicator and was passive-aggressive, at least. She never really explained too much about her source or sources of anger, or the unhappiness she said she felt from her childhood, other than she was programmed to be perfect. But she did talk about her problems to some degree with Tori in 2 separate chapters. Tori talked about some of their problems while she was growing up in her book Storytelling. She said she asked her mother one day when she was young if she was pretty, and Candy told her she would be after she had a nose job. Tori knew she came from a wealthy family and assumed one day she would inherit a large sum and didn't fight for raises at her job, where her father was the producer on Beverly Hills 90210. Anything Candy did for Tori was always attached with strings. She bought a condo Tori moved into and increased the rent on her until her roommate moved out. Candy controlled Tori's first wedding and refused to pay for anything Candy didn't want. And as Aaron grew sicker, Tori felt Candy was purposely isolating her father from her, and she found out about Aaron's death from someone else who saw the announcement on TV. Candy said she wasn't sure Tori and her second husband Dean would show up for Aaron's funeral, so she didn't even reserve them a seat to sit in front with the family. A friend of Candy's who was sitting up front gave up his seats for Tori and Dean. Even with the birth of Liam, Candy's first grandchild, they were still very uncomfortable being together. Candy didn't seem to like that Tori had a group of friends with her at the hospital she didn't know. She got on her phone and complained about it. Tori said in her book Mommywood, if anything happened to her and Dean, then they had some friends who agreed to take care of their children. Tori did not believe Candy had any interest in being involved in her children's life beyond posting photos on her website. Candy said both she and Aaron were angry with the show Tori and her first husband Charlie wrote called So Notorious that depicted her in a bad light. Later, Tori left her first husband after she met her co-star Dean on a TV movie production. Candy said she was not surprised because Tori had misgivings about the marriage and talked to her mother about it. She said she could see the same problems she had with her mother were similar to the problems she had with Tori. It's called generational trauma, and problems aren't dealt with, they are simply passed down from generation to generation like some dark heirloom. Candy said at least between herself and her mother, they always managed to talk to each other, and the problems did not end up on the cover of gossip magazines. Then came the inheritance. It was estimated that the Spelling estate was about $500 million. Now these same sites claim it's $600 million, but undoubtedly there's a fortune. From that fortune, Tori and Randy each inherited 0.16% of the fortune. $600,000 their father set up for them in private investments, and an inheritance payment of $200,000 to total $800,000. Yeah, people were shocked. Tori said in storytelling that she was pregnant at the time, and if your parents are worth $500 million, would it have been plausible to expect to inherit a measly $10 million so she could stay at home for a while during her pregnancy? As strange as it sounds, Aaron had absolutely no concept about money. He had money managers, and he didn't know the difference between $1 or 10,000. And it's hard to believe, but plenty of ultra-rich people try to sell themselves as being financial wizards, and they actually know nothing at all about money. It's the people behind the scenes who create the wealth, and Aaron went along with what Candy wanted. As for Candy, she comes off as being very greedy. Women who marry for money usually are. Dominic Doone wrote an article for Vanity Fair pointing to Candy as the one making the decisions for such stingy payouts to the children, and the sad ending of Aaron locked away in the monster mansion, separated from everyone and losing control of his business. Candy said they were moving the company away from TV producing into micro conglomerates owned and controlled by Viacom. Apparently, the company did not receive bids on the market they were hoping for, so it was being restructured. Candy basically said, through someone else, that Dominic Doone was a scourge of the rich. Actually, Dominic did a lot to support the rights of victims of crime. He had a daughter named Dominique, who was unalive for her ex-boyfriend when she was just 22 years old. The Doone family were treated horribly by the justice system, and the man who unalived his daughter received a sentence of 7 years for taking her life. He would have been overjoyed to have the time with his daughter Candy does not seem to appreciate having with Tori, and if Dominic had $500 million, he certainly would have shared plenty with his daughter. Yes, Tori has a problem with spending money, and some sources say she is in debt right now, but she learned her spending behavior from Candy. Just look at all the buying she did to fill her house. And she is so excessively wealthy, it's hard to understand why she is so greedy with it. But plenty of excessively rich people are. When her father, who she called a flim-flam man, was in trouble financially, she made him work as a production assistant on the Love Boat, where he met and married another assistant, a woman much younger. After her father died, Candy found out her father spent most of his money, and his widow asked Candy to buy her a house, but she refused. One piece of jewelry would have bought her father's widow a decent home in California. One piece of jewelry was worth more than her children inherited. Candy was upset when Elizabeth Hasselbeck and Joy Behar from The View ripped her apart in an interview concerning her children's inheritance. But good for them for saying something. It's just not right. Candy decided to sell the manor and wanted $150 million for it in 2009. She held on to it for over 2 years until UK heiress Petra Ecclestone bought it in 2011 for $85 million. She gave Candy 30 days to move all of her crap, or collectibles, and Candy had to make decisions on where all of her collectibles would go, either to donation, to storage, to auction, or to her $47 million two-floor condo. Ecclestone put $20 million in renovations into this white elephant and listed it on the market in 2016 for $200 million. And then she dropped it to $160 million. Then a Canadian billionaire bought it in 2019 for almost $120 million. And it's currently on sale for anyone who wants to waste millions and millions of dollars every year for $137.5 million. Any takers? Anyone? Anyone? Candy can't just move into a home and put up new wallpaper and be satisfied. She had to completely tear apart her new condo, only to decide she wanted another condo that's still under construction. She accused the property owners in a $3 million lawsuit in 2019 of willful mismanagement, concealment of financial information, and sheer ignorance. Candy received $12 million back from her condo purchase during the housing drop. She placed her Malibu mansion on the market in 2019 for $23 million, then later removed it. Sadly, it burned down in 2025. While waiting on her condo renovations, she was renting a $28,000 a month luxury condo, but Candy and the landlord sued each other because the landlord said she overstayed her lease and had to get out while she wanted to stay on. The judge ruled in her favor, and she intended to sue the landlord for her legal fees. Also, she was angry the building where she bought the condo didn't have the restaurant opened on time, and she was suing them again. Candy has remained active with her book writing and production shows for television and theater. She tried her hand at operating a business when Aaron was still alive with a candy store, but it closed down in 2 years. She also designed dolls for QVC with the proceeds donated to charity. Candy said she started eating as a way of relieving stress when Aaron was sick, and she realized she had a problem with emotional eating and body dysmorphic syndrome. She said when she was young, she never had a problem with weight and was 97 pounds on the day she married Aaron. But she admits she was obsessed with her appearance. Even as a scrawny child, she still felt she was fat. She didn't gain weight after her pregnancies, but as she got older, she found herself gaining a lot of weight she didn't feel comfortable with. She said it was when Aaron was diagnosed with prostate cancer that it was clear she was turning to food for comfort. Candy said food filled a black hole that was swallowing her up alive, and she struggled to come to terms that Aaron was sick. Tori was mad that Candy may have found another outlet. It was reported that she was spending time with another man in the declining years of Aaron's health. Candy would later throw herself into the dating scene, something she hadn't experienced since marrying Aaron in 1968. She said she found dating at her age daunting. She thought about online dating, but her friend set her up on a blind date with a guy she called Oscar because he was like an octopus. He couldn't keep all his 8 arms off of her. Another blind date from a friend was named Larry, and he shaved 5 years off of his real 75 years to make himself more eligible. Another friend of hers sat her down and had the talk about protection and additional education. She told Candy she needed to ask him for a health report. She also told her she would need to use contraception. Candy decided she would walk into a pharmacy and buy the protection herself. She found a whole aisle dedicated to so many varieties, and she didn't know which one to buy. So get this. She called her son Randy for help. She told him he had to be a big boy about this, and she explained her problem. To say Randy was uncomfortable was an understatement. Candy said they implemented the don't ask, don't tell rule. She started at one end of the aisle and cupped her hand over the phone as she read all the varieties off to him. Finally, she came to one that said Magnum size. No, Mom, Randy said, that's not good. Not good at all. That's not what you want to buy. You could make a guy feel really bad if you bought those. She finally settled on one and waited for the line to clear at the register before making her purchase. Randy called her a few days later and asked how everything went. Wink, wink. Well, it was an experience. Larry had prostate cancer, and not only had his prostate removed, but had a wee-wee implant. Apparently, it was very expensive, and Candy felt like she was getting intimate with a bionic man. He could go for 5 or 6 hours, and no woman wanted it for that long. Plus, she thought he wanted to get married, and she had no interest in that. So after a 6-month marathon, she broke up with him. He was a very nice guy, and he did find someone else to marry later on. Candy said she was happy for him, and hopefully his wife was not too exhausted. She also dated a guy named Jack, who got way too comfortable too fast when she allowed him to sleep over at the manor one night. She found him the next morning being served breakfast in bed from a tray by the butler like he was the King of England. Not even Aaron had been so presumptuous. Candy must have known that there were many fortune hunters who would want to marry her to get hold of her money, and she has made the decision not to marry. Besides, she said she had grown to be very independent, and she has found companionship with her dog Madison. She has said in interviews she would leave her estate to her grandchildren, who love her and call her Candy Graham. As for the elephant in the room, as she referred to a few times in her book, it's doubtful Candy and her children will ever see things eye to eye. But if they could just ignore the elephant in the room and be able to spend time together as Candy is growing older, they will at least have these memories with her, and their children will get to spend time with their grandma in her declining years. Sometimes you just have to learn to find the apology for yourself you wish you heard from the person who hurt you. Maybe as a song she quoted in her book said, if the brokenness inside Candy doesn't start healing, at least there's a chance for the healing to start in Tori and Randy, and they don't have to pass that pain down to their children too. Let's hope so. Candy's book is definitely worth buying and reading. Thank you for listening. Video number 5 on Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton will be up shortly.